we'll hop right into the debate today. And with us from Kyiv, we have Arnfred Bojesen, and you'll be our first speaker along with Oleksandra Bulenok. And Julia, you're the director of the Ukrainian Danish Youth House, and you started working 2 years ago with this project. So we hope to learn a bit about that and hear a bit about the last year, how it's been for you to do your work, and what you see and hear from Ukrainians, what they want from us in Denmark and maybe from the other EU countries or neighboring countries. And our other expert speaker is Oleksandra Bulenok. And Oleksandra, you're working at the Ukrainian Danish Youth House in Kyiv, 24 years old, working as a communications officer, but also studying communications, isn't that right? Yes, and we'd like to hear from you what it's like to live in Kyiv, in Ukraine, what it's been like for the past year for you and other young people, other Ukrainians. And we'd like to learn a little bit more about what you hope for and want from the other countries in Europe. So we'll start out with you, Julia. The microphone is all yours.
Thank you very much, Rasmus, and thank you for this invitation. I am amazed that there's so many people who want to listen to us today. That's very, very good that we want to hear some insights from Ukraine and not only the pictures on the news. As Rasmus said, I have been the director of the Ukrainian Danish Youth House for exactly 2 years now, 2 years and a few days. And before that, I also used to work in NGOs. I worked in the Danish Foreign Policy Society, Det Udenrigspolitiske Selskab, and I also worked and was very active in youth organizations before, mainly working with Eastern Europe and building bridges between Eastern and Western Europe. I went to Ukraine the first time when I got an internship at the Danish embassy in Kyiv. And I knew very little about it. I chose to go to Ukraine because I had never been. I knew nothing about it. And I was very curious to learn more about this enormous country. And I was extremely fascinated that I didn't know more at the time. There was no focus on it whatsoever. I never heard about the Ukrainian history or the language or anything, even though I actually had spent years focusing on Eastern Europe. So now, when I got the opportunity to work on this project, I was very happy to go back to Kyiv, which is a fantastic, beautiful city, full of life and culture, and also because it, for me, has been amazing to see what has happened in Ukraine the past few years since I started to get to know it, but also like knowing what happened since the Revolution of Dignity in 2014. And the development has been very big and very fast. For those of you who don't know, in 2013-14, the Ukrainian people, led by mostly like students and young people, started a revolution, what we in Danish call the Maidan Revolution, which in English is called the Revolution of Dignity, where they went on the streets to claim the corrupted government to leave, to integrate more with the European Union, and to distance themselves from Russia. And this was a very long and ended up like a very bloody affair with very many people losing their lives. Yesterday was actually the Remembrance Day of the people who lost their lives in the Maidan Revolution. And this was like the starting point of like a really big turnover of the Ukrainian society. So you had, there was a lot of, political reforms that started with the new governments that came in place. There was a lot of focus on, fighting corruption, improving the police structures, improving the legal structures, liberating the media, giving space for civil society to work. And at the same time, there's been a really big cultural awakening, which has been really interesting to observe. So the people who started this revolution were maybe 18, 19 years old. and now they're 30 years old, and the change that you can see that follows this development has been very, very interesting. So there's a very pronounced national identity that's visible now that I think has just become stronger in the recent years. There's a very strong awareness of what it means to be Ukrainian. There's a strong awareness about their own culture. The civil society is very active. And of course, last year, with the full-scale invasion of Russia on the 24th of February, it hits right into a very, very positive development in Ukraine. So the civil society was stronger, the media were stronger. In 8 years, the political system, despite challenges and fallbacks, had still developed immensely more than many other countries have done in so short time. So, and the economy was growing. Even during COVID, the economy was growing. Things were going well. Ukraine was gaining some kind of reputation as a tourist destination, as a business place. And then this war kind of ruined or tried to ruin this whole positive development. So for me, I think, aside from the personal pain and distress that, of course, I was evacuated just before the war started and had to leave my home in a hurry, but luckily before any of the attacks started. But I think the biggest pain for me this year has been to observe that there's this big positive development of fighting for better education, for fighting for better, conditions, working conditions, better future. All this was kind of broken into pieces on the 24th. And now what we see is that the people who were back then were doing more constructive things has had to take a step back and now have to sacrifice their lives in the front lines, or helping those people who are on the front lines. And everybody now has to rearrange all this very kind of positive energy that was into military, into getting weapons, into humanitarian aid. And this is very, on a societal level, it's a very painful development. On the other hand, I have also observed that everything that this war was intended to do has kind of failed. The Ukrainian people is more united than ever. If there was any doubt about, how the general perception is regarding Russia, now there is no doubt anymore. When you see, they have done surveys on how people are towards, what opinion people have towards the EU, towards NATO. And the EU support is much higher in Ukraine now than it is in Denmark, for instance. Right. So the war has really proven, I think, for very many Ukrainians that now is the time to kind of stand together, and people really want to be a part of Europe. They want to be a part of NATO. They want to distance themselves from an imperialistic neighbor. And this is very, very visible. So now it's the resistance is even stronger. All this, the cultural development, the identity is much stronger now than 1 year ago, because now it's kind of a matter of life and death. So it's very pronounced, and the support for democratic development is also sky high now. People are really they want to get rid of the corruption. They really want to fight for their rights. But of course, first they have to, win this war, end this war, so then they can start developing again, let's say, all that was stopped from the invasion. So I think that's my overview, I think, of the, let's say, on the...
There's a lot more to say about it. And
yes.
As you can hear, Julie has been following the development in Ukraine for years, and she's back in Kyiv now, talking to people. So you can pose all sorts of questions on Ukrainian politics and so on. But let's move on to you, Oleksandra Bulenok. You're working at the youth house, and you're young yourselves and part of the young community. So can you tell us a bit about yourself and your work in Kyiv?
Yeah, thank you so much. It's so nice to be here. It's so nice to have a chance to talk to you. And I'm quite pleased that so many people decided to spend an hour with us. I'm super grateful for that. I'm Oleksandra, as it was already said. I'm from Kyiv. I was born here and I'm a journalist and a communicator. I have a bachelor degree in journalism, volunteer and startupper in my New Year's past. And now I am working in the Ukrainian Danishus House, a beautiful organization that unites us and like shows Ukraine to Denmark and Denmark to Ukraine. And yeah, I will tell a bit like from the personal perspective how I felt being Ukrainian before 2014. Do you hear me well? Because I can see
yes,
that.
We do, Oleksandra, but because you are on a microphone and muted, you're not automatically on the screen. So you
can
just
you
have to change the page a bit and find Oleksandra. And if you do a bit of waving, Oleksandra, nobody's in doubt that it's you.
Okay, let's try to do it this way.
Now we have you at the center of attention.
Yeah, we just have the one microphone for both computers. But anyway, so super. How I felt before 2014, before actually the whole world get to know that Ukraine exists, I felt that nobody knows that we exist. Basically, because we were super associated with Russia, that we were close to Russia, that we were parts of Russia, that we were like part of Soviet Union, and probably a lot of people, a lot of foreigners, I felt didn't even understand that the Soviet Union wasn't only Russia. And it was like being a citizen of a country that other foreigners just don't know about anything about. It felt like that, I know, and those who knew, they couldn't see any difference between Russians and Ukrainians, and I can feel that Belarus people will say the same for themselves. I felt that they perceive Ukraine as a super agrarian country. We have a very strong agrarian sector, but still it's not only about fields and cows and villages. It's about much more. I also felt that the first thing that people think about when it comes to Ukraine, when it was about Ukraine, was about Chernobyl catastrophe. You know, like some things that are not describing you as a nation, and only describing you as a nation with a very painful past. I grew up, and I guess there might be such a question. I grew up in a Russian-speaking family. I mean, like my parents spoke Russian language, but at my school and my university was fully in Ukrainian, because it's our state language. And I will tell you a bit more throughout my story. I will tell you a bit more why it's important for me. Because eventually I switched fully to the Ukrainian language, and I guess that some of you may not understand why is it important, but I will tell you about it. Before the Revolution of Dignity, I actually felt a lot like we are super calm country, even though in 1991 we had the revolution to separate from the Soviet Union, even though in 2000s we had a revolution to support the candidates we wanted. Despite everything, I thought that we are a super calm country because the whole world was like full of wars and conflicts and a lot of fear. And I was like, okay, we are living a very calm life. And I couldn't even imagine that everything would happen like that. And then our ex-president Yanukovych decides that we will postpone our connection with the European Union. Students don't like this approach. Ukrainians don't like this approach. And how we do it in Ukraine, we start a revolution because we are a democratic country and we don't want to if we are not okay, we express that we are not okay. And actually, everything was going in a pretty quick way. I was 15 back then, and I cannot say that I was a very conscious citizen. I always felt like I'm Ukrainian. I was pro-Ukrainian, but I could never understand the politics. I was just a schooler, living my normal life, and suddenly the center of my city is covered in dust, is covered in bricks, car tires. Suddenly the Christmas tree that was supposed to be decorated is turned into the symbol of revolution, covered with posters, covered with slogans. And I went to the city center, even though my parents forbid me to do that, obviously. But young people. I went to the city center just to see what was going on. I was pretty afraid, and that was the day when the first attacks on the Protestants were. It was like some hours before, and I just went throughout the city and just saw that yes, it looks super different from what I'm used to. Like the city center of the city I love the most in the world looks super different with flames and dust, but I was surrounded with free people, and that's the freedom. You could see it. Yes, you could see it with your eyes. And yeah, afterwards, what happened. Crimea was taken. I don't know how to say it in English. Occupied, let's say. Afterwards, they entered Donetsk and Luhansk region, and everything went super crimea. I remember that Crimea was for all of us, and we even have a teammate from Crimea. For all of us, Crimea was the super personal peninsula, because everybody used to go there every summer with their parents, and it's just like it was super personal. It has never been far away from every Ukrainian. And just not to be super brief, what happened during each of the year between 2014 and 2023, I would just say that, yes, the perception of Ukraine changed. But again, we were seen as a war country. Somebody knew about the Revolution of Dignity. Everybody I spoke to knew about Crimea. But when I was like, okay, but there is still a war going on, I understood that people don't know, as it wasn't interesting enough anymore, because it was probably, it's my perception, because it was concentrated on Ukrainian territories, and it wasn't threatening for the whole world, even though our, as you usually said, imperialistic neighbor is very threatening for all the countries that surround it. And I understood that people already started to know that we are not the same as Russia, because Russia decided to invade us. But actually, the difference between our countries was still not seen. And I could feel, for instance, I went to the volunteering experience in 2018. And only now I understand how insensitive it was, because I was co-volunteering with a Russian, and but I took it as a chance just to tell that about Ukraine, how does the Ukrainian language sounds, because I assume, I don't know if you have ever heard Ukrainian language, but I strongly advise you, it's beautiful. I understood that, and at the same time, it's actually understandable that the European Union, or just like the outside world, didn't feel the same difference, didn't feel the same pain. I understand that, but still, it was here. It was here that that people couldn't see the difference between us. Just to say that when it comes to the fact that I was still the Russian-speaking person, but I had a huge dream of raising up my children as a Ukrainian speakers, because I thought that it would be much easier than for me to transfer and so on and so on. But then 2022 came, and I switched fully to Ukrainian. Before, so like 1 year ago on this day, I couldn't believe that the full-scale war will happen. It was like, I couldn't understand why everybody is talking about something, and like if we are planning, like if we know, how could we know the date of the start of the full-scale invasion? How can we know about that? I didn't even realize that it would actually happen.
No, 1 year ago, there was still this military exercise at the border of Ukraine.
I'm sorry, Rasmus, are you saying something? Because I guess I have been muted.
I just said that exactly 1 year ago, it was still a military exercise at the border between Ukraine, Belarus, and Russia. And a lot of military experts in the West, at least, didn't believe there'd be any kind of war or invasion. But it came almost exactly 1 year ago.
Yeah. at this time, 1 year ago, I was actually probably I looked through my photos just to be precise. 1 year ago, I went to Uman, a beautiful small city in Ukraine that after 4 days later was heavily bombed. Today, I was probably working for my startup because before the full-scale invasion, I was the co-founder of an innovative startup, thinking about how can we go to European markets. Probably after the day at work, I went to see my friends with whom we were planning the accelerator for social startups, for young social startups. And we will probably have a coffee and dream about my friends coming to see my place and just living a normal life. But everything went different. On 24th of February, I actually went to sleep pretty late at 3 a.m. and I woke up at 6 a.m. from the call from my friend who was like, Sasha, you have to wake up, the war began. And I was just like, okay. And I left my phone, and then half an hour later, I woke up again and like, what? Wait. I called again, and my friends were already trying to escape Kyiv. A lot of heavy traffic. So there was no possibility to escape Kyiv like we usually do in several hours. They had to stand for the whole day, and in the suburbs of Kyiv there were a lot of traffic, and so on and so on. So it was a very long journey. For instance, my friend who just had her child, he was 1 month old at that moment. She had to stand at the border for dozens of hours without her husband, surrounded with the other young mothers, because men are not allowed to escape Ukraine, like to cross the border, surrounded by other mothers that lost even their milk because they couldn't, because of the stress. It was like unbearable cold and just like. But I was at that time in Kyiv. I was at the time at my home. I was like, okay. I decided to start packing my my backpack, because everybody was talking a lot about backpacks. You have to pack your backpack before 24th. You have to be ready, and I didn't prepare because I couldn't believe it would happen. And I started preparing on 24th in the morning. And afterwards, anything was the same. I felt that I didn't have any hunger. I didn't want to sleep. I just felt that I have to do something. I have to do something. And you are constantly looking for something you can do. I know that's like all the organizations, all the workplaces, they stopped their operational activities, obviously, because they had to help the employees to flee. And but my co-workers that's from the startup, they didn't escape Kyiv as well. I was looking for the places I could help, actually, and you could feel throughout the first month or even more, maybe somebody feels it right now, that you're not doing enough. You're trying to do something and it feels like you're not doing enough. Like how can you compare like your volunteering stuff when you have your friends, 20 years old friends defending your country with the weapons, standing looking at the faces of those who want to kill you. Nothing could compare, and it felt like that nothing can compare to it. I was very much forced to leave. Everybody was like talking about it. You have to leave. And why somebody don't want to leave Ukraine? From my experience, it's like you feel that you're betraying. I was looking outside the window, looking at Kyiv, and feeling that I'm betraying my city. That it's an interesting feeling. I have never felt it, because when you're traveling or when you're even going as an immigrant, it's a very different feeling, because because you know that you can come back. And I didn't know that if I ever come back, and that if my city will look like that, the city I grew up the city that has all the memories I appreciate so much, will be the same.
Oleksandra,
But
we have a lot of
still,
questions
I
lining
spent
up. So
first
I'm
weeks
just
in
going
Kyiv.
to,
We were.
Oleksandra, sorry. Oh, we have a lot of questions lining up for you too. So we'll just let people post their questions and we'll, of course, let you answer them. So we have
Sure. Because I can talk
something
about it for, for days.
No, it's perfect. In fact, we have some questions. Could you pass the
Yes,
mic?
we do. I think that Rex, if you could kindly unmute yourself and go ahead and ask your question.
Thank you very much. And thank you also to the organizers for this series you have started. It's very interesting. And I know I should just limit the time to post a question. I'm a representative to the UN NGO summits annually, and I'm a member and a vice president of an organization called Association for World Education. I have been a folk school teacher for many years. We had NGO programs in the 90s with the participants from Ukraine, and I have been to Lugansk in that connection. But I was very surprised and happy when I read about this youth house in Kyiv. So my first question is about how is it possible for you to operate with the house? What are you doing in the house? I'm asking because I have another member of our organization who is a teacher, and he's in the center of Kyiv, and he's trying to teach every second day online with young students. And he needs.
Super. That's a very, very good question, Rex.
Yeah.
What are you doing in more concrete terms in the Ukrainian Danish Youth House? And I think we'll take an extra question. But yeah. Rex, there's a lot of other questions, so we'll take an extra question from another participant.
Yes, Thomas, if you could also kindly unmute your microphone. Then
yeah.
Here we are, Thomas.
I think you should answer. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. I think she should answer the first question because mine be a totally different subject.
Please bring it up. We'll just.
Oh, okay. It's more a hard-on question. It's since you represent a youth house, are you in the Ukrainians you're talking to? Are they for a status quo peace, or are they following Zelensky with getting all the territory back before the peace can be negotiated?
Those are two excellent questions, quite different. One of them is, what do you do in concrete terms in your everyday work? And the other one is, how do you perceive the opinion among Ukrainians on the territories? And what kind of compromise with Russia would be possible, or whatever negotiation would be possible?
All right, we just decided that I'll take the first one and then Oleksandra can take the second one. I think that's suitable. So thank you so much for good questions. Yes, the Ukrainian Danish Youth House, for those of you who don't know, it's a project that started 2.5 years ago. And it's funded by Danida, implemented by the Danish Cultural Institute and the Danish Youth Council. And the goal is to have a house, the youth house here in Kyiv, where we are right now, as a platform to support young civil society, to support the youth organizations, to support volunteers who don't have a place to meet, who don't have a place to do their, work with their organizations and plan their, democratic participation in whatever way. So we've worked. It's been a quite hard way to start because we started during COVID. So the concept of making a meeting place where people could actually meet and do projects together and learn and go through trainings, etc., has been quite difficult. But we managed to do it by hybrid formats. And afterwards, we've used different places around Ukraine. We have exchange programs talking about democratic action, democratic confidence, cultural expressions as a part of being a democratic citizen. But now, and then basically since a month before the invasion, we have been working on renovating this building where we're in now, that we had our first event in on Saturday, which is why I'm here also for the first time in a year. And this is going to be a hub for like volunteer youth organizations and youth activism. Interestingly enough, it's taken a long time, but we've managed. And how we operate, it's challenging because we have to take into account that there's air raid alarms almost every day, where you have to follow security advice. You have to go to a shelter, to the basement, go into safety in case something hits the city. And there has been a lot of blackouts. We of course had challenges with the fact that also all my colleagues were I was evacuated to Denmark. My colleagues had to flee their homes for some time, but now they're back. There's been blackouts, there's been lack of water, lack of heat. It's been completely crazy, but Ukrainians never give up. So here we are. So they held me accountable and we worked through it. And now we actually managed to have the house ready. And what we do is that we still offer these activities, we offer the space for young people to use, but of course, adapted to the circumstances. So we do it smaller than we maybe would have in peacetime due to security, so that it's possible to get people out of the house if it's necessary. And we, of course, take into consideration that some of the things we planned 2 years ago might be a bit out of touch with the situation people are working in now. So now they might need some other skills and some other trainings and some other discussion topics because there is a war all around, and we have to take into consideration that people lose their lives every day and that everybody is affected. But everything is actually going. We've done a lot and we're still doing a lot, and it's totally possible. And Kyiv looks like itself. The mood is different, but the city still stands beautifully as it is. And that means that life kind of goes on. It's interrupted by the air raid alarms and the blackouts, but life goes on. And that means that people work when they can. And that's what we've done. So actually, we still operate and we house a lot of different people in the building.
Thank you, Julia. And Oleksandra, you're going to give us a try on telling a bit about the general opinion of Ukrainians on the war and the development of that.
Oh, it's a super hard question when you are like inside the society, because we all are. I cannot say that we have the only opinion, obviously, because the country is actually super exhausted, and the country is exhausted because the war has been here for already 9 years, and it's already 1 year of the full-scale invasion, and we are losing a lot of young people, a lot of infrastructure, a lot of pain. It's about a lot of pain and sacrifices. And obviously, I know that there are people who are like looking just for peace. They're looking for it to stop, you know. And I don't want to take. I personally, I don't want to give up on territories, because firstly, it's internationally recognized borders that we have. But secondly, after all the history of pain of this life near the imperialistic country, it's just like the least we can do for our people is to have our country as it is. We don't want, because, you know, we were discussing all together that we have some cities outside Ukrainian borders that were Ukrainian before, for instance, before the processes when the territories were redefined. But the point is that we don't want to invade another country to take them. We want to live in our own country. We want to have our people. We want to have our people living in a prosperous country in peace, obviously. Personally, I don't see the point of giving up on territories, because knowing Russia and living near Russia, it's not like they're going to stop. I don't believe in that. I mean, like, while they have this regime, I don't believe if we give up on our territories, it will ever end. I'm not sure if I will ever be safe in my own country. if we don't stand for our priorities, and our priorities is to have our borders as they were in 1891. So I pretty much support this approach. I know that's a lot of people, and I understand their approach, that they don't want it to go for more and more years, because when you're losing your people, it feels so much different when these are your friends, your family that dies. Because like when just like to say that we are from day to day, we are surrounded with the horrifying stories, but meanwhile with the stories of hope. I also lost my friend on the battlefield. He was younger than me, so he was 22. He will never turn 23. But I know that he was fighting for his region that he comes from the east of Ukraine, because he comes from there and he could never come back. Like I also have friends from Crimea, from Donetsk and Luhansk, yes, because Russia wants them so desperately, and also like some other regions since 2022. I know those people that had to go through a lot of obstacles just to see their relatives, just to come to their own cities. I don't believe in peace if it's about sacrifices from our side. I don't believe in peace, in such peace. I believe in peace that comes from with our territories, with our borders, and with the safety guarantees. That's what I believe in.
Thank you, Oleksandra. And we have a lot more questions. So I think we'll go for 2 more, Fatma.
Yeah. The next one is Karin Bergquist. If you could kindly unmute your microphone.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, fine. Now maybe you have already answered, Julie, but I just wanted to have 1 or 2 examples of activities at the institute where you could say you had some positive effects, some positive activities. Yeah.
Thank you for that, Karin. We'll take another question, Fatma.
And Bo Vesterlund. If you could kindly
Yes,
unmute.
Putin has tried. Do you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Resonance. Okay, Putin has tried to make the Belarusian army join the spring offensive. Will Lukashenko and the Belarusian army do that? Almost 1 year ago, Belarusian made railway sabotage against the Russian troops that passed through Belarus. But what do Belarusians think now about the spring offensive, and what do young people in Belarus think?
Thank you, Bo. We have a meeting Thursday on Belarus with some people from the political milieu, some exiled government people, so we can delve into that a lot more there. But for you, Oleksandra and Julia, you could maybe tell us a bit about your perception of the Belarusians and the other neighboring countries around Ukraine, and what you expect from them, help or hostility. So we need some concrete examples of activities. I think you can manage that, and your view on neighboring countries.
Great. Yes, absolutely. I can definitely be a bit more concrete. We have done, I will not mention it all. I think we've done about like 100 activities since we started, but some of the bigger ones was, for instance, this program that we called Mikomri, which is called like Dreams from Mykolaiv, where we have made like a program in collaboration with a Ukrainian, kind of like a folk high school organization that normally used to do that, and now they have issues with the funding, and some of the places were shut down because they were occupied, etc. But we made a program that lasted 2 months on how to organize if you want to volunteer in your local society. With the Ukrainian experts, giving a few lectures. People had to kind of think, how do I want my city to look in the future? How do I want Mykolaiv to be rebuilt? So it also benefits the people more. So now we have a chance to rebuild it in an inclusive way, taking into account the rights of, everybody, human rights, inclusion, etc. And it ended with a big, we had 100 people participating in the first 2 months, and then 50 people were brought to Denmark on an exchange program in the end, met with Danish youth organizations who also work with inclusion, met with politicians, etc., and are now back in Mykolaiv, have discussed already with the city council what they want to see, how they want to have an opinion on the rebuilding of the city, etc. Now they're planning their own youth spaces and working on like taking forward the inspiration that they got. That's one. We've also had another one that was really constructive, which is that we've made like a school of dialogue and facilitation, where we, based on some of the Danish Youth Council's experience, translated some materials on dialogue and conflict handling in and conflict resolution in your volunteer organization and, you know, at your local level, did trainings with that for people who then would become trainers themselves. And it took no more than a few weeks after we had done this weekend training before half of the participants already had recreated this dialogue training for their own organizations that they came from. So we've seen that they were really inspired. They really took it forward. And I met at our opening event here on Saturday one of the participants who said it was not only like a learning point, but for her it was therapy, that you actually get out of this war, but you get to do something constructive and you get to, you know, put yourself out of this horrible situation where you only like you don't see the light, let's say, and then you get to do something something more constructive for others. So that's like two of our projects that had a really nice
thank you for that, Julia. And Oleksandra, can you tell us a bit about Belarusians or your perception of the neighboring countries and people?
Okay, so when the revolutionist processes took place in Belarus, we were super supportive because Belarus was super supportive towards Ukrainians. Since 24th of February, I cannot say that we have the same connection. My personal perception is that when we know that Belarus army, we have even, how to say it, combat groups from Belarus with Belarus people who don't want to join Belarus army and so on, that they are fighting on our side. They are now in the armed forces of Ukraine or in other, let's say, forces that are defending Ukraine. However, my personal perception is closer to negative as there are missiles coming from the Belarus territory, and they are basically coming to every city that I've been throughout this year. So I'm not that much close to them right now, but still I can see from all of Ukrainians, we still have more hope in Belarus than in Russia. Russia is just like for now provokes only the cold rage. It's not only the hate. It's another stage of negative emotions. It's just a rage. If we are talking about Belarus, I still think that there is a future, but personally, I'm not ready for a dialogue. Let's say for now, it's just like too sensitive and it's too painful.
And how about Russia? Because there's been a lot of relations, friends, and family across the border between Ukraine and Russia before the war. Can you tell us a bit about how the connection or the dialogue with the people in Russia is now?
For a lot of people, it's terrible. It's a personal tragedy. For a lot of people, when you don't see the support from your relatives, that they don't even perceive it as a war. It's a huge personal tragedy. I have a close relative that is also, but he lives in Ukraine, and I see him quite a lot. And it's tragedy. It's a drama. Actually, a lot of families, I guess, were ruined because of that. Obviously, somebody moved to Russia because there is safer, let's say, than in Ukraine. Somebody went to their relatives, and I know, and it's obviously their choice, but I know some people, and it's like there were a lot of media stories covering people that lost their actually family connections because of that. Because it's like there is nothing more disappointing when understanding that your close people they are okay with the fact that the country they support is trying to kill you or rape you or destroy your home. There is nothing more disappointing and devastating actually in terms of moral side. It's a lot of families were ruined, just to say, because of this.
We have a lot more questions, so let's take 2 or 3 more, Fatma.
Yeah, the next one is Kirsten Nielsen.
Kirsten Nielsen, can you unmute and pose your question?
Kirsten, we can't hear you. I think you need to unmute your mic.
We'll take the next question and get back to Kirsten in just a second.
Thomas?
Now I'm on. Sorry. Now I'm on. Yes. Well, I think maybe Oleksandra almost answered my question, but my question is, what did you learn about Ukrainian history in school way back during the Russian Tsar regime? And how do you think the experience of the elders has influenced the present feelings of being Ukrainian and feelings towards Russian-speaking Ukrainians? That's the question.
It's a very good question, Kirsten. Thank you. We'll take one more. We'll take a few more questions so we can.
Yes, Thomas. Go ahead.
Yeah, it's a bit of a follow-up. I don't know if it's a follow-up question, but I heard that the United States is going to send Abraham tanks, and they're using depleted uranium shells, if you know what that is. But it's a radioactive ammunition, and they were used in Iraq and Syria. And you can see that had a huge impact on the local population with the birth defects. Now they're coming to Ukraine, and US is talking about sending cluster bombs as well. And cluster bomb is a bomb you throw, and then it opens up, and then throw a lot of smaller bombs around the area. And a lot of them don't explode on impact, so they're going to technically act as mines. So all of this, Russia is going to respond with take as Ukraine is using dirt bombs. And we can see a huge escalation in this conflict. Does this have any? How do you think Ukraine is going to prepare for this?
That's a very big question, but I think we'll try and pose it. So we have from Kirsten a question about the history of Ukraine, how you were taught in schools, and how the different narratives or histories are being used now. And we have a question on the war, and we have a supplement question from Egon Thompson, who wants to know this threat of nuclear weapons, a bit in line with Thomas' question. How do you cope with that? What do you think about it? What do you hope for, expect from other countries regarding cleaning up after the war?
I will start with the first question. At least it's comes from my life. As again, I come from the Russian-speaking family, and just a disclaimer, there has never been any aggression towards me. There has never been any aggression towards my parents, or personally myself. And how the history was taught at school. it's a complicated question because there is no difference between that narrative and the one that we have right now. At least inside Ukraine, I know that Russia owns its own version of history, that we have never existed, that we appeared from Lenin's desire, but throughout the history, you can see a lot of documents even from the Russian Empire that prove a very different approach. But okay, yes, in Ukraine it was. I don't know. We were taught about Kyiv Rus, then the Hetman Empire, not Hetman Empire, but Hetman times. I'm not sure if you know, but it's like Cossacks times. We were taught about, let's say, the periods when we were a part of Poland, of Austrian-Hungarian empires, like about the period when we were under Russian Empire. So basically, everything was pretty much structured. I cannot say if it was more about the pro-Russian narrative or pro-Ukrainian narrative. It was just like supported with documents and taught as, okay, that was the period when Russia abandoned Ukrainian language for dozens and dozens of times. Mm-hmm. It's supported with the historical documents. It's not like taken from the ear. And when you live in now, hearing a super different history, telling that I, as a Ukrainian, don't even exist, I cannot express my feelings about that. And you were asking about the older generation that lived in the Soviet Union. Obviously, sometimes it hits a lot because there are a lot of people that, for instance, had the stable job at the factory because the Soviet Union was a very industrial country, and they may actually miss this period very much because they had to transfer from one way of living, even though they didn't know about the repressions, even though they didn't know about the Ukrainian language and how it suffered. And I'm actually surprised that the Ukrainian language even survived after all the periods. But it survived because of those people who were killed, who were sent to Siberia and so on. And they had to transfer from such a life where they, let's say, may felt secure. It was super stable. You were working, you were getting paid, and the products were cheap. Yes, and suddenly you receive the independent country where you have to invest your time, your strength to build up, let's say, not from the scratch, but from a lot of pieces of painful experience and a lot of pieces of hope. And I guess not all of them. It's just my perception because I'm not the representative of that generation, but it's my perception that it was pretty hard for them to transfer from the life they had to the pretty new one. But again, after the Soviet Union was collapsed and we got to have independent countries. After that, it's not like we got rid of Russian. It's not like we got rid of this, let's say, friendship narrative that we are one nation. It's not like that. So actually, I assume they felt pretty okay because we had Yanukovych that was super pro-Russian. We had like it was somehow pretty at some point pretty similar because we were, let's say, so close. But you understand that it's not that much true. I don't know, some of them obviously still may think that they won't come back to the Soviet Union, but the fact is that it will never happen. And and about Russian speaking people, just a brief story. I have my friend that comes from the west of Ukraine. She lived in Kyiv for a long period of time, and when she was a child, she was at school and she was a minority because other children spoke Russian language. And she felt, and she was told that it's not cool to speak Ukrainian. This narrative changes and it's good and it's for better because previously in the past century, it was not cool and it was not like you could get a good job if you're a Ukrainian speaker. Ukrainian language was, let's say, for villages. We were told that it's for villages. It's not like the language of progress. but it is a language of progress. It is a language of future. I'm not discriminating those people who are afraid or decided not to transfer, but it's just like, I guess it comes with the time. Sometimes there is a moment when you're super enough, when you're enough of speaking the language of those people who come to shoot you.
Thank you, Oleksandra. And Julie, can you get us in just a few minutes a feeling of what Ukrainians want with the cleaning up after the war, what they want from us when it comes to nuclear threats and the whole support during this terrible times?
So I'll try to answer quickly on this very specific question about weaponry. I think, and of course, Oleksandra is here to correct me if I'm wrong. My impression, both my personal opinion and the impression in general, is that I don't think that these things pose a bigger threat than the threat that Ukraine is already going through every day. Russia has already used cluster bombs. Russia has used hydrogen bombs. They have occupied the biggest power plant, the biggest nuclear power plant in Europe, and keep the workers as slaves working 24/7. I'm like, this worries me way more than there might be some, weapons that the Ukrainians might use that leaves, unexploded mines around. Not to say that it is a huge problem with the contamination. Enormous parts of Ukraine are now contaminated with mines, with leftovers, with shrapnels. Obviously, a lot of parts of Ukraine are destroyed. You've seen the pictures in the news. So it is an enormous problem. And demining is going to take so much time. And it's a tragedy. It's polluted in the worst sense. And of course, some of the weapons that Ukrainians will get and will use will also contaminate. But it's still that's kind of a part of what it means to be at war, that you can't let the enemy attack and then not attack back, I assume, or otherwise you just, in Ukraine's case, you will just die. So I understand the worry, but I think that the other threat is much bigger. And the cleaning up is already there's a lot of, thankfully, there's a lot of international experts who are planning and preparing and already working on campaigning against not touching objects that are lying out in the forest. The Ukrainian authorities warn about not going to these and these areas because they're contaminated. Some of the bridges, closer to the front line, all these things. But it's a tragedy what this war leaves, so I mean, one would only hope that it ends quickly so there's less to clean up.
Thank you, Julia. We've spent the 60 minutes we promised you to take you through, and thanks a lot to Oleksandra Bulenok and Julia Arnfred Bojesen from Kyiv, and we'll give you our famous Zoom clap. It's a bit lame because you can't hear us all, but please, everybody put on your microphone and give them a clap. It was so nice of you to take the time to come and talk to us. And to the participants, I can tell you that we have a tourney, a series of meetings all around the country on the war in Ukraine and the role of EU and Denmark. So if you have more questions, could be military, tactical, whatever, on refugees and so on, we have experts coming to a town near you where you can come and join. And we have 2 more briefings in this series tomorrow and Thursday, on Russia tomorrow and on Belarus on Thursday. So please sign up for those as well. And thanks again to Oleksandra and Julie. It was really interesting to hear from you. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much for letting us talk for so long. And thank you for good questions. Take care.